They told me the house across the street was empty, but on my very first night, someone in the third window waved at me, and I swear I was home alone. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe. It helps more than you think. Now, let's begin. Emily Blake moved into her new home on a cold, indifferent afternoon. The kind of day that feels unfinished no matter how much sunlight it gets. The town of Overton Ridge wasn't big, just a quiet patch of winding streets, aging maples, and houses that seemed to lean slightly inward, as if sharing secrets. It was the sort of town where the mail arrived early, the neighbors waved from their porches, and nothing truly bad was supposed to happen. Or so she hoped. After the divorce and the choking pressure of the city, she needed silence. Her therapist called it resetting the nervous system. Emily called it survival. The house she found was older than she preferred, a narrow two-story home with creaking floors and wallpaper that had surrendered its color decades ago. But it felt safe, or at least safe enough. Across the street stood another house, much older, dark brown and sharp-edged like something carved rather than built. The windows were tall and bare, without curtains, blinking like hollow eyes. She noticed it immediately, not because it was unusual, but because it felt strangely present, as if it had been waiting for her. She wasn't the first to warn herself not to think too much about it. By evening, she met her neighbor, Mrs. Harrow, a thin, almost translucent woman wrapped in a beige sweater that looked older than the street itself. She walked with the slow certainty of someone who had lived too long and seen too much. "You're the one moving in," she said, her voice soft but brittle. "Just remember one thing, dear. Whatever you do, don't look at the third window of that house." Emily let out a short, unsure laugh, thinking it was a joke. But the woman didn't smile. "In that house," she clarified gently, pointing with a trembling finger. "The third one from the left on the second floor. Keep your curtains closed at night. And for God's sake, don't look back if something catches your attention." Emily wanted to ask why, but the neighbor was already turning away, muttering something she couldn't quite hear. Something about the window choosing people. The first night settled early. The town fell into a stillness that felt almost staged. Emily unpacked slowly, arranging dishes, books, and the few pieces of furniture she had left. The silence was comforting at first, a soft, steady hum that filled the background like a blanket. But by midnight, she noticed something strange. Whenever she passed by the living room window, the house across the street seemed brighter. Not fully lit, just a faint, almost imperceptible glow from the second floor. A low light, like a candle or a dying bulb. It flickered once, then went completely dark. Emily stared at it a moment longer, waiting for movement she couldn't explain, wanting to see. Nothing. She closed the curtains, convincing herself it was just her imagination. A trick of the streetlight. Fatigue. Stress. Anything but what it felt like. But later, while brushing her teeth, she glanced out the bathroom window and froze. In the third window of the house opposite, a shape stood perfectly still. Too tall, too centered, too aware. It didn't move, didn't shift, didn't fade. It was simply there. Her heartbeat thudded against her ribs. She stepped back, shutting off the light, convinced she must have seen wrong. And yet, even in the darkness, she felt an unmistakable weight, the sensation of being looked at. She didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, sunlight washed the house across the street, revealing nothing unusual. No silhouette, no signs of life. The window was empty, almost aggressively so. But on her own window, Trapped faintly in the thin layer of condensation, she saw the shape of a handprint. Not big, not small, just wrong. She hadn't touched that window. She knew she hadn't, and yet someone, or something, had. Emily tried to ignore the handprint. She wiped it away with the sleeve of her sweater and convinced herself it must have been left by the movers, or maybe even the previous owner. But even as she scrubbed it clean, she felt a crawling unease along her spine. Not fear exactly, but an intrusive awareness, like being watched by something patient. The day passed quietly, too quietly. Overton Ridge wasn't lively to begin with, but today the silence felt heavier, as though the entire street was holding its breath. Emily unpacked the rest of her boxes, set up her small desk by the window, and made a half-hearted attempt to plan a new routine. But no matter how she tried, her attention kept drifting across the road to the old house. Its windows reflected nothing but sky. Its porch sagged under decades of neglect. And still, she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't empty. In the afternoon, she forced herself to step outside. Fresh air helped, until she noticed Mrs. Harrow sweeping her porch with slow, deliberate strokes, her eyes fixed on the house across the street. Emily approached, trying to sound casual. "Does anyone live there?" "No," the old woman said immediately, without even glancing at her. "No one you should concern yourself with." "You made it sound like I meant what I said." Mrs. Harrow's voice sharpened, surprising Emily. "That window. It doesn't like being noticed. Don't give it attention. People who do don't stay long." Emily opened her mouth to ask more, but Mrs. Harrow turned her back, ending the conversation as abruptly as it started. Emily walked home unsettled, feeling more like an intruder than a neighbor. By sunset, the air had cooled, and the street seemed to sink into a deeper stillness. Emily cooked a simple dinner, opened a bottle of wine she'd been saving for no occasion in particular, and tried to relax. She put on a movie, something light, something safe. But halfway through, she found herself glancing toward the living room curtains. They moved, just slightly. A gentle sway, as if someone had brushed a hand along the fabric from the other side. She froze, then told herself it was a draft. It had to be a draft. Still, she walked over cautiously and held the edge of the curtain between her fingers. The fabric was cold, much colder than the air in the room. She hesitated, then pulled the curtain open just enough to peek out. Nothing. The street was empty. But the house across the road wasn't as dark as before. A faint glow again pulsed behind the third window. Not steady, but slow, like breathing. A cold wave rolled through her chest. She closed the curtain quickly and retreated to the middle of the room, gripping her wine glass too tightly. The movie kept playing, but the sound seemed distant now, swallowed by the tension crawling through her ribs. When she finally went to bed, exhaustion pulled her under within minutes. For the first time since she moved in, she slept deeply until a soft sound woke her. A faint tap, then another, rhythmic, delicate, like fingertips, tapping on glass. Her eyes snapped open. The sound came from the living room. She didn't want to check. Everything in her body told her to stay in bed. But something stronger, a stubborn sense of not wanting to be afraid in her own home, pushed her to get up. The tapping continued, steady as a heartbeat, guiding her like a thread. She stepped into the living room. The curtains were still closed. The tapping was coming from behind them. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She forced herself to reach out, pinching the curtain's edge between shaking fingers. She pulled slowly, an inch at a time, until her view opened to the street outside, and immediately she felt her blood turn to ice. In the third window of the house across the street, the figure was back, perfectly still, perfectly centered, as if waiting for her. Only now it wasn't a silhouette. It had shape, detail, a human shape, standing inches from the glass. Emily's breath hitched. She stepped back instinctively, and the figure, though motionless, seemed to lean forward, as if reacting to her movement. She shut the curtain hard, stumbling away from the window. The tapping stopped instantly. Silence flooded the room, thick and suffocating. Then, after a full minute of dead stillness, came a new sound. Not tapping, not scratching. A single, soft knock. From the inside of her home, on the wall directly behind her. Emily closed her eyes. She wasn't imagining things. Not anymore. Someone, or something, was inside the house. Emily didn't move at first. She stood in the center of the dark living room, barely breathing, listening to the silence press against her from all sides. The knock had been soft, almost polite, but that only made it worse. A threat whispered instead of shouted. Her mind raced through explanations, rational and irrational. An animal? A branch? The house settling? No. Nothing alive outside could knock from inside her wall. She forced herself to turn slowly toward the sound. The wall behind her was blank, freshly painted, completely solid. No door, no window, no pipe large enough for anything human. Another knock. This time a little sharper, directly behind the drywall. Emily stepped back until her heel hit the leg of the couch. She didn't dare speak. Every instinct she had screamed that acknowledging the sound would be a mistake, that whatever was knocking wanted her attention far too much. When the knock didn't come again, she backed away, inch by inch, until she reached her bedroom door. She slipped inside, closed it quietly, and locked it. The lock felt laughably small, like a toy latch on a cardboard box. But it was something. The night stretched on endlessly. She sat on the edge of her bed, gripping the phone in her hand. Call someone, she told herself. Call anyone. But who? The police? What would she even report? There's knocking inside my walls. And a figure in a window that shouldn't exist? No. She needed evidence, something real, tangible, something more than the wild fear curling in her stomach. Eventually, exhaustion pulled her into an uneasy sleep. She dreamt of footsteps walking circles around her bed, soft and deliberate, always just out of sight. She woke at dawn with the uneasy sense of being watched. The house was silent, but not peacefully so, more like it was waiting. Emily went to the kitchen to make coffee, hoping routine would ground her, but when she reached for a mug, she froze. There, on the surface of the cabinet door, was a mark, a smear, long, vertical, as if fingers coated in dust or ash had dragged downward. She backed away quickly, heart hammering. This wasn't from her. She hadn't touched that cabinet at all yesterday. Something had. She left the mug where it was and stepped into the living room. The curtains remained closed, just as she'd left them. She almost didn't want to open them. Almost. But fear of the unknown was worse than seeing the thing directly. She pulled the curtain just an inch. The house across the street looked the same as always. Lifeless. Empty. The third window was dark again. No figure, no light, no movement. But something new made her stomach drop. The glass on that window, the old, dusty, untouched glass, now had something written on it. A single word, drawn with the stroke of a fingertip. Emily. Her knees went weak. Someone in that house, something, knew her name. She let the curtain fall shut, backing away fast enough that she bumped into the coffee table, sending a stack of magazines sliding to the floor. She barely noticed. She needed answers. Not guesses, not stories. Answers. Mrs. Harrow. The old woman clearly knew something. Emily grabbed her coat and raced outside, the cold air hitting her like a slap. She crossed the street and climbed the neighbor's porch steps 2 at a time. But before she knocked on the door, she heard a voice behind her. "You shouldn't stand out here." Emily turned sharply. Mrs. Harrow was already outside, standing on the edge of her porch, clutching a wrapped shawl around her thin frame. Emily hadn't even heard the door open. "Please," Emily said, her voice thin with panic. "You have to tell me what's going on. Someone's in that house. Someone wrote my name." "No," Mrs. Harrow interrupted firmly. "Not someone. Not in any way you're thinking." Emily stared at her. "What is it then?" The old woman hesitated, truly hesitated, as if saying the words might bring something closer. Then finally, quietly, she said, "That window doesn't show who lives in that house. It shows who the house wants." Emily felt cold all over. "Wants? What does that mean?" Mrs. Harrow stepped closer, lowering her voice. "There were others before you. People who noticed the window. People who looked too long. It doesn't bother everyone. Only the ones who fit its pattern." Emily swallowed hard. "What pattern?" "I don't know. I only know what happens. First, the window watches. Then, it imitates. Then, it chooses." "Chooses what?" "You," the old woman said. "Or rather, a version of you." Emily's mind spun. Her stomach dropped. Imitates. She thought of the shadow in the window, its shape, its stillness, its unnerving way of reacting to her movement. It hadn't been watching her. It had been studying her. Before she could speak, Mrs. Harrow grabbed her wrist with surprising force. "Emily, listen carefully. Once the window knows your name, it doesn't stop. You must not engage with it again, not look at it, not acknowledge it. Don't give it the chance to finish what it started." Emily pulled her hand free, feeling a sharp spike of fear. "What happens if I do?" The old woman stared at her with hollow, exhausted eyes. "Then what stands in the window stops being your reflection and starts being your replacement." Emily didn't remember walking home. One moment she was standing on Mrs. Harrow's porch, the old woman's trembling voice echoing in her ears. The next, she was inside her own living room, coat still on, breath uneven, as if her body had acted without her permission. Replacement. The word clung to her like frost. She paced the room, trying to think, trying to ground herself in logic, but every logical explanation collapsed under the weight of last night's events. The knocking, the figure, her name written in dust, and now the idea that something across the street wasn't just watching her, it was learning her. She stopped in the center of the room and realized something. The house felt wrong. Not just eerie, but subtly rearranged, like someone had tried to copy her space and got it slightly, unnervingly incorrect. The lamp on the end table was angled differently. Her books on the coffee table weren't stacked the same way she left them. And the rug, she stepped back, was off by an inch. Just 1 inch, nothing a normal person would notice. But she noticed. Because she hadn't moved it. Something had been in here. She backed away until her shoulders pressed against the bedroom door. That was when she heard it. A soft, faint scrape coming from the ceiling. Long, slow, dragging. Her breath hitched. Above her bedroom was nothing but a sealed crawl space. No access, no ladder, no reason for anyone or anything to be up there. The scraping continued, mapping the outline of her room from above, tracing the perimeter like someone crawling just under the surface. She forced herself to step into the bedroom. The air felt colder here, closer, thicker. She didn't turn on the light. Every instinct told her not to draw attention. The scraping paused, right above her head. Emily held her breath. 10 seconds passed. 20. Then, with a sudden, violent jolt, something slammed against the ceiling. A single impact, a fist or a head, right above her. Dust drifted down like falling ash. Emily stumbled backward, slamming into the dresser. Her heart thundered against her ribs as she grabbed her phone with shaking hands. She didn't care if it sounded insane anymore. She needed help. She dialed 911. The ringing barely lasted 2 seconds before the call failed. No signal, not even one bar. She stared at the screen, horrified. Her phone wasn't just out of service. It showed a notification she'd never seen before. Network error. Device ID not recognized. She swallowed hard. Her own phone didn't recognize her. Minutes dragged by. The ceiling stayed silent. Eventually, Emily stepped back into the hallway, pulse finally beginning to steady. She needed to leave the house. It didn't matter where she went. She just needed distance, sunlight, other people. She walked toward the front door and froze. The door was open. Only an inch, but she knew she had locked it. Slowly, she approached, her hand trembling as she reached for the knob. Before she touched it, she saw something on the inside surface of the door. Another smear, vertical, finger-shaped, the same as the one on her kitchen cabinet, only this one was bigger, longer. It dragged all the way down to the floor. Her breath stuttered, her vision swam. She turned around, slowly, because she suddenly felt watched again. Not from outside, from inside. The living room was dim, the curtains still drawn, but the shape of her own silhouette stretched across the wall in front of her. Except the light behind her wasn't bright enough to cast a shadow like that, and the shadow wasn't matching her movement. She stepped right. The shadow did not. She stepped left. It stayed still. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, the shadow lifted its head, even though Emily was standing frozen, head lowered, not breathing. Her blood turned to ice. The shadow straightened, taller than her, shoulders sharper. Its head tilted with a slow, unnatural grace, as if testing the range of a new body. And then, it raised its hand, a long, thin hand, and the shadow's palm pressed flat against the wall, right where the smear had been earlier, as if matching the gesture of whatever had dragged its fingers down the door. Emily stumbled backward. She blinked, and the shadow vanished. Gone. Completely. Her pulse hammered in her skull. She backed toward the door, hand shaking uncontrollably as she fumbled with the lock. She needed out, needed air. A soft, gentle knock sounded behind her. Not from the door, not from the wall, from the living room window. Her heart stopped. She turned slowly, dread crawling up her spine like ice water. The curtain was still drawn, but a faint silhouette pressed against the fabric from the outside. A human silhouette, but wrong. Too thin, too tall, too familiar. It raised a hand, the same long, thin hand, and tapped the glass once. Just once. Then she heard a whisper, muffled, distorted, coming from the other side of the window, and yet somehow from inside her house at the same time. A whisper in her own voice. "Emily, let me in." Emily didn't answer the whisper, but the sound of her own stolen voice seeped through the window pane like cold air, curling around her skin and sinking into her bones. She stepped backward, pulse sharp and frantic, the whisper repeating again, softer, closer, as if the glass were thinning. She stumbled toward the back of the house, heart jackhammering as the temperature dropped, the floorboards creaking beneath her feet in slow, deliberate patterns that didn't match her own steps. She reached the kitchen, then froze. The back door, locked that morning, now stood open by a narrow, unnatural sliver, as though someone had slipped inside and left it ajar in invitation. A faint draft slid past her, carrying the scent of wet earth, dust, and something older, something wrong, like the breath of an empty room that had learned how to inhale. Emily shut the door with trembling hands, her fingers brushing a new smear, another long, finger-shaped mark dragging downward from the midpoint of the door to the floor, as if whatever had touched it had paused, thinking, learning. Her lungs tightened. She backed away until her hips hit the counter, and the house seemed to lean inward with her, the air thickening, pressing against her from every angle. Then she heard it again, a whisper, not from the window this time, but from the hallway behind her, closer now, almost inside her ear. "Emily, let me be you." She spun around, but the hallway was empty. Yet the shadow cast on the far wall was not. It was her shape, her outline, but stretched taller, its arms too long, its posture too rigid, as if trying to fit into the idea of a human form and getting the dimensions just slightly wrong. It tilted its head, an echo of a movement she hadn't made, its silhouette rippling as though made of thick smoke struggling to hold a shape. Emily stepped backward, but the shadow stepped forward, not in sync, not mimicking, but advancing with intent. The lights flickered violently, darkness strobing across the hallway until the shadow vanished, only to appear an instant later much closer, inches from her, though it remained a flat impossibility on the wall. The air grew heavy, charged, as if the house were exhaling around her, walls flexing with unseen breath. Emily ran. She sprinted to the front door, fingers clawing at the lock, twisting it, yanking it open with a crack of wood as cold daylight flooded in. She bolted outside barefoot, gravel biting into her skin, lungs burning as she fled across the porch and into the road, until she stopped dead. The house across the street, the house with the third window, was no longer dark. Every window was lit with a warm, golden glow, as though a family lived inside and had been living there all along. Slowly, mechanically, the curtains of the third window parted. A face leaned into view. Her face, but not hers. The expression was wrong, sewn into a permanent half-smile that didn't touch the eyes that were too wide, too focused, studying her like prey. The other Emily rested one palm against the inside of the glass, and there, written beneath it, on the fogged surface of the window, was a new word: stay. Emily staggered back, pulse roaring in her ears, but before she could run, something brushed her shoulder. She turned, slowly, dread pooling in her stomach. Mrs. Harrow stood behind her, pale, shaking, eyes filled with brittle pity. "It's too late," the old woman whispered. "Once it finishes learning you, There must be two. One inside, one outside. It decides who belongs where. Emily's breath faltered. "Which one am I?" she asked, her voice breaking. Mrs. Harrow swallowed. Her gaze slid to the house behind Emily. Its front door, still open, slowly, softly, quietly began to close on its own. "I'm not sure," she said. Emily turned sharply toward her own doorway, heart plummeting. For a split second, just before the door shut completely, she saw a figure standing in the darkness inside. A figure with her shape, her posture, her silhouette, watching her, waiting, and smiling her smile. The door clicked shut. The house across the street went dark, and Emily finally understood. One of them had been chosen, but she didn't know which one she was.